Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I am your host, Nelson, and today we are once again doing 3 segments. We are going to be picking up from the previous broadcast, talking about some of the games from yesterday. In particular, Joel Embiid going off for 70 points, and Karl Anthony Towns going off for 62 points as well. We will also get into Kevin Durant's game winner and his back-to-back 40-point games in the second segment, and we will go to our third segment where we talk about the MVP ladder. Go ahead and stick around for the show where we will go ahead and reveal what the fourth segment of the show is. I ask that you remember to follow and subscribe to the show. If you want to become a member or a part of the show, there will be a link in the description. Once again, as always, please I remind you all to tip and donate. If to get your comments recognized, make sure you go to the following link. That is streamelements.com/gsmcsportsnetwork./tip. Makes the show much more interactive between myself, the host, you guys, the viewers. That is streamelements.com/gsmcsportsnetwork./tip. And now let's get right back into the first segment of the show, which is Joel Embiid dropping 70 points. But before that, actually, there was trade that happened about an hour ago. The Charlotte Hornets are trading Terry Rozier to the Miami Heat for a 2027 first-round pick and Kyle Lowry. So now Terry Rozier is on the Miami Heat. Kyle Lowry was, I believe, he had substantial minutes on the Miami Heat, and was a very vital piece in the Miami Heat and their progression going into the finals for those 2 years. So he was, he was a very vital piece to that offense, a very important veteran, a very good role model. So I don't know exactly what this move is for the Charlotte Hornets. I don't know what they expect to get out of Kyle Lowry. He does average a decent amount of minutes. He doesn't really, his stats, they're okay for given his age and the role that he plays right now or that he played for the Miami Heat. But I don't exactly understand what they could get out of him in this deal, but I guess we'll find out later. I thought that was actually going to be their trade piece to get DeJounte Murray, Kyle Lowry, and a couple of other pieces, but I guess I was wrong. But let's go back to one of the anticipated matchups of the last night, which was Joel Embiid dropping 70 points. He passed Giannis's record of scoring 64 points in the season to scoring 70 points last night. He became the third player in the last 2 years to do this. The last 2 players that scored 70 points are Damian Lillard and Donovan Mitchell. So he is the first center since David Robinson to score 70-plus points. Obviously, doesn't matter what team you do that on, scoring 70 points is a lot of points, but with Joel Embiid, there's this sort of subset, this sort of group of people that don't necessarily like Joel Embiid's play style. I'm one of those people that doesn't like his play style, but at the same time, I am not one of those people that is going to completely disregard the fact that he dropped 70 points. he has a subset of haters that think that everything that he does good doesn't matter simply because he can't do this in the postseason. Now, my personal opinion, the regular season is a long time, and the league is trying to find ways to make this regular season very important. Saying that big games like this and big performances like this don't necessarily matter is the exact opposite of what the league is trying to do and making these games very important. So it doesn't matter that this performance is against a bottom 3 team in the league. Like, they went up against the San Antonio Spurs, and okay, so what? If anyone scores 70 plus points, that is impressive. If anything, this is how like any fan should react if their favorite player is and this is how any fan should react, and how any fan should expect their favorite player to respond when going against bad teams like this. They expect them to go off. They expect them to have these big nights. They expect them to do these type of things, to have these great games. So, with this performance from Joel Embiid, what does this do to his status in the MVP voting? So, as of right now, he is neck and neck between Jokic. Shai recently moved up to 3, while Giannis and Luka are down to 4 and 5. It's funny because every single year Luka manages to make it to the top 5 in MVP voting, but he always ends up finding his way out of that voting, despite being a fan favorite like every single year. And here's the thing this year. There's a cap to how many games you are required to play, meaning that if you do not meet that cap requirement of 65 games, you aren't getting the MVP. So Embiid has played in 32 games compared to Jokic, Shai, and Giannis, who have played over 40 games. So if Embiid misses a few of these games because, like, God forbid he gets injured, he could risk not getting the award. So that MVP might not be confirmed for him simply because of the amount of games he has played. And it seems to be a lock for him as of right now, assuming that none of the other players below him end up going off towards the end of the season. But let me know what you guys think in the comments below. If you guys think that do you guys like these changes to the awards? Do you like that now you have to be required to play a lot of games in order to get these awards? Or did you like how it was before, where you didn't have to play every single game and you didn't need to have that sort of restriction on you as a player? I personally think it's great. Once again, goes back to what I said before about putting value on the regular season. I see this as a step in that direction, and it's a step in the right direction. Obviously, it's going to take a while to get used to that thinking, since everything important that happens in any sort of sport happens in the postseason. But still, a lot of people aren't going to be happy with Embiid winning this award if he can't make it out of the second round. That is a very big stipulation on him. The only reason why people are looking at this more critically towards him than anyone else is because he is the only player that has won an MVP and has never made it past the second round. There's also the argument that he won the MVP last year out of pity and that it wasn't deserved. A lot of people wanted Jokic to win that award last year. I was one of those people, but it doesn't matter because he ended up winning the Finals MVP. So that's always great and really shows like who the better center is. Joel has opportunities to make noise in the postseason, but every single time he fails to do so. A lot of the people would find more value in a player like Jokic, not just because of his regular season performances, but also because of his playoff performances. Obviously, having or being good in both is much more valuable than just being an MVP in the regular season. But as of right now, Joel Embiid is that MVP favorite, in my opinion, because of that amazing performance on the anniversary of Kobe dropping 81 points, R.I.P. his soul. He obviously, and coincidentally, he wasn't the only center or the only big man last night that had a very good night on Kobe's anniversary. We're also going to talk about Karl Anthony Towns in the second segment after this short break. So I will be right back. And welcome back to the second segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Before I begin with the segment, once again, I'd like to remind you guys to please go ahead and tip and to donate. Definitely helps the show, makes the show much more interactive between myself, the host, and you guys, the viewers. The link is streamelements.com/gsmcsportsnetwork./tip. That is the link that is right below in the ticker under every single overlay that you will see. So without further ado, let us begin with the second segment, and that will be talking about Karl Anthony Towns being the other center that went off last night. The Timberwolves faced off against the Charlotte Hornets, and the biggest story behind this game was the big night from Karl Anthony Towns going off for 62 points. Most of these points came in the first, second, and third, and he was only able to muster 4 points in the fourth quarter, coming up short from the Charlotte Hornets in a comeback win. The Charlotte Hornets were down by 12 to enter the fourth quarter. Apart from Karl Anthony Towns and his 62 points, and Nikhil and Rudy Gobert being decent on offense, there was really no offense for the Timberwolves last night. If any of their players were to hit some of their shots, they would have won the game without a doubt. But the only player that really showed up to play offensively was Karl Anthony Towns. This game should have been a blowout for the Timberwolves. The coach of the Timberwolves was not happy about this game. You could see in the post-game interview, he was very upset with how the Timberwolves were playing. He thought it was immature. He thought that there was no defense to be played. And because there was no defense being played, it allowed the Charlotte Hornets to be able to hit their shots and get back in a rhythm. And once the Timberwolves ended up not being able to hit their shots, or Karl Anthony Towns not being able to hit his shots, once again, I said he only scored 4 points in the fourth quarter, then the whole team was in a loop, because if Cat wasn't hitting his shots, nobody else was hitting their shots, then they have no offense. Now, instead of it being a blowout win for the Wolves, it ended up being an upset in favor of the Hornets. Brandon Miller was trending on Twitter. It's Miller time. He was the star scorer for the Charlotte Hornets, putting up 27 points on only 13 shots. LaMelo Ball was also there and scoring, getting 18 points and assisting on 13 shots. It's been a really big problem for the Wolves with this loss to a very bad team. This is not something to be taken lightly. You should not be losing to a team like this when you have the number 1 seed in the Western Conference. If you can only get one of your star offensive players going against one of the bad teams in the league, that is really bad news. And not to mention, this team they were playing like they didn't even want to score. It was more of force feeding Karl Anthony Towns the ball and hoping that Karl Anthony Towns would score. That's not how you're going to win games, and that's why the coach was really upset. You need to be able to get both of the players going, both on the offense and the defense. Just because you're having a good night on offense doesn't mean the effort needs to stop on the defense, and that's something that was happening towards everyone else. And it might be because they're young and because, they're excited and whatnot, but still, they have to remember to maintain that discipline because they are a playoff team, and they're essentially competing to be that playoff team to beat in the postseason. So if they don't give off that reputation now, that is a huge problem. The offense was literally just Karl Anthony Towns all night, and that's something that can't happen. In other news, the Phoenix Suns were also able to win their game. They played back-to-back. They played the other day where Kevin Durant dropped 40 without taking any free throws, and now they played this game where Kevin Durant decided to drop 43 again. And instead of the free throws, he decided to hit a game winner. Devin Booker and Bradley Beal were a bit quiet last night, with Booker only scoring 16 points and Bradley Beal only scoring 18, but a win is a win, as they do say. It is a bit concerning, however, because this is the Bulls team without Zach LaVine at the moment. DeMar DeRozan wasn't playing well as he went 8 for 17, only scoring 21 points, and they lost by 2 points. On the bright side, if you're a Bulls fan, Kobe White, he is a fan favorite, scored 26 points, got 10 rebounds and 9 assists. If Kevin Durant did not step up the way that he did, then the Phoenix Suns definitely would have lost this game. Obviously, they won, so it's not a big deal. But for now, it's not a big deal. But there are going to be games where everyone needs to step up, and this is honestly the perfect parallel from the game that I mentioned before. The same with Embiid's game that I mentioned before, where it was just one player doing the thing on offense. The one players for each team respectively and each game respectively was Joel Embiid, Karl Anthony Towns, and Kevin Durant. 2 of those 3 players ended up winning the game because their defense ended up holding out. Now, you might argue that, the offense was definitely doing its job because the player was scoring so many points. The one player was doing its job, but was the rest of the team doing its job? For Kevin Durant, the rest of the team wasn't necessarily doing its job. Devin Booker wasn't scoring as much. Grayson Allen was 3 for 4 from 3, which was great, but he usually tends to score a little bit more. Bradley Beal definitely scores a little bit more. Along with the rest of the players that were on the team. Anthony Edwards, again, did not shoot particularly well in this game. But regardless, you need to be able to play defense and you need to be able to defend. The Phoenix Suns allowed a lot fewer points, or allowed the Chicago Bulls to score a lot fewer points in their game, despite the fact that their offense wasn't playing particularly well, which ended up being the difference maker in that game. Now, definitely, it was important for the defense to be strong if you're the Phoenix Suns, especially with Kevin Durant going off. You definitely don't want to waste having one of your players go off in a very important game, or you definitely don't want to waste having a a good offensive performance, but also allowing the other team to score several points on you, making the game close. And it's always important to have a good defense going into the playoffs so that way you don't have to worry about your defense lacking and constantly needing to make sure that you have to score every single possession. And speaking of defense, we can talk about a team that's really good at defense, which is the Boston Celtics. Last night they went up against Kyrie Irving and the Dallas Mavericks, along with, I don't know if you know about this, but Kyrie Irving used to play for them. Kyrie had a decent 24 points against his former team, but that was overshadowed by his teammate Luka Doncic, who ended up scoring 33 points with 13 assists and 18 rebounds. But even that was overshadowed by Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. Jaylen Brown had 34 points, and Jason Tatum had 39 points with 11 rebounds along with the win. The Celtics won by 9 points in the Mavericks' territory on back-to-back road games for the Celtics on back-to-back nights, showing the team's prowess in the regular season and showing why they are a top 2 team in the NBA right now. Obviously, I talked about Embiid having a big game, but Victor Wembanyama also went off for 33 points. Obviously, it wasn't anything compared to Embiid having a crazy night, but Victor was also is the leading candidate for Rookie of the Year. Joel Embiid is one of the candidates for the league MVP. It's close for both Wemby and it's close for Joel Embiid, and they're both competing against players at their own position. Same could be argued with Tatum. You could argue that Tatum has MVP cases, but in my opinion, I don't think anyone is stopping Joel or Jokic from absolutely running away with this award, even though this win over the Dallas Mavericks definitely improves their stature and their overall appearance to other teams in the Western Conference and in the rest of the league, because this shows that now they're able to compete against every single team. Despite not having a strong bench, they have a strong starting lineup that is able to withstand the fact that they don't have an elite bench. So right now we are going to take a short break and go into the third segment where we talk about the MVP ladder. So I will be right back. Welcome back to the third segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast. And On this third segment, we are going to talk about the MVP ladder as of right now. And given the recent games, it's no surprise that number one on the MVP ladder is Joel Embiid. And trailing him right now is Nikola Jokic. Those are the top two players ranked in MVP voting right now. They are the two favorites, without a doubt. And the next players right below that is Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Giannis Antetokounmpo. Now, if you notice, it's all international players that are in the top five, because below that is Luka Doncic. So all international players are in the top five for MVP right now, which is pretty impressive. Now, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander recently passed Giannis Antetokounmpo for being one of the favorites in MVP voting. Obviously, that's really a huge accomplishment because for the last few years, the last 2-3 years, Giannis has always been a lock for being top 3 in MVP voting. It's basically a given for him to either be a runner-up, win it, or be a top 3 in every single year. Same with Nikola Jokic. It's always given for him to be a top 2, top 3, and the same with Joel Embiid. You can't really topple those 3, but Shai Gilgeous-Alexander does just that, being the one player on the best team in the West, in my personal opinion, right now, which is the Oklahoma City Thunder. I believe that team is right now very well suited. Do I think that they will win it all in the postseason? If they can keep this up, yes, because I have no question about them in the regular season. I'm just worried about them in the postseason because I haven't seen Shai Gilgeous play in the postseason like I did Nikola Jokic. So can't necessarily say that he's going to make a deep run. So obviously behind Giannis Antetokounmpo, there's Luka Doncic. I mentioned earlier that Luka Doncic always finds his way being number 1 in the MVP voting at the beginning of every single year. But every single year, he ends up being out of number 1, and he ends up being in like the bottom of the top 5, which isn't bad because Luka Doncic is a phenomenal player. Being a bottom top 5 MVP caliber player is not bad whatsoever. But seeing as how it's Luka Doncic being the favorite, a very big fan favorite, and being the favorite to win MVP practically every single year, it's kind of funny how he drops at the bottom of the tier list every single time. Now, Jason Tatum is directly below Luka Doncic. I don't mind Jason Tatum being directly below Luka Doncic. Jason Tatum is one of those players where it's like he deserves to be involved in MVP talks, but he doesn't necessarily need to be brought up all the time. He's in that mediocre category where we all know his value, but he's on a very good team with a very good system. So we drop a couple of points for that because he's not even, while he might be the best player on his team, he's not the most paid player on his team right now. Not to mention, the team is loaded with talent. So him being the best player is just about the only impressive part about his game at this point, and is what he has going for him in the MVP ladder. His game is phenomenal. Don't get me wrong, but the way that the MVP is determined is determined with how much help you have and the numbers that you're producing. So with the amount of help that Jason Tatum has with the starting lineup he has, Jaylen Brown, Drew Holiday, Kristaps Porzingis, himself, and Derek White, and with how they're playing, that is a very, very good starting 5. So he's obviously going to get docked a couple of points on the MVP voting simply because of the elite squad that he has. Domantas Sabonis is directly below him. I don't understand why Domantas Sabonis is on there. Does not make any sense to me. The Kings, they don't necessarily have a good win percentage to even be on here. Same with Anthony Davis being on here. The Lakers don't have a great win percentage for Anthony Davis to be on here, so I don't understand why these two big men are both on here. It might be because they both average double-doubles, which is very good counting stat, very good total stats, a very good PER, efficiency stat. Tyrese Halliburton is 9th in MVP voting, which is one of the things that I fully disagree with. Tyrese Halliburton does not play defense. He is a one-sided player. For as good as a one-sided player as he is, I don't see the appeal of him being he's a very talented passer, don't get me wrong, but a lot of people give him more credit for his passing than they do for his actual abilities on the floor, and I don't necessarily like it because I feel like it's overrating a lot of the other point guards who can play make, but it's just they don't get the assist numbers. Now, Tyrese particularly looks for the assists, and he makes the passes, obviously, but the players also make the shot. They run a very fast-paced offense, and their defense obviously lacks because while their offense might be going in very fast and in a very fast-paced manner, the other team's offense is also going. So that's the reason why most of their teams, while they end up scoring a lot against all those teams, they also end up giving up a lot of points against those teams. So that's my personal opinion. I don't understand why Tyrese is on this list. Kawhi Leonard being on this list at the top 10, at the bottom of the top 10, not a bad inclusion. I feel like he should be a little bit higher up simply because of how well the Clippers are doing. Then again, all of the players are contributing to the Clippers' success, so it might not necessarily be because of Kawhi Leonard and his prowess in the regular season, but still. Now, once again, I mentioned how I don't understand why Tyrese should be on this list. Who would I replace him with? Donovan Mitchell. He's on the Cavs. He's been leading the Cavs to a much higher seed than the Pacers are with Tyrese Halliburton, not to mention how the Cavs don't have Darius Garland at the moment, and you could argue that Kawhi should have higher odds to win the MVP than Tyrese, moving Tyrese down to the bottom 10. Now, even with Tyrese on this list, that doesn't change the fact that I think Anthony Davis should also be removed completely from this list. Doesn't really make much sense to me how none of the players on the Clippers, like Paul George or James Harden, I mean, personally, I think Paul George over James Harden just because Paul George is averaging much better numbers this year, should be under a player such as Tyrese. I don't understand that. Maybe it's because I'm old school, but to me, that doesn't make much sense. Luka doesn't have the win percentage. I mentioned win percentage before being a reason why I don't think Sabonis or Anthony Davis should be on this list. Luka doesn't have the might not necessarily have the high win percentage either, but he has the high numbers, so he's definitely guaranteed to be on these types of lists. Giannis Antetokounmpo, clearly the best player on the second best team in the East right now, the Milwaukee Bucks, but Shai is higher than him because right now Shai is currently the best player on the second best team in the West, in the Oklahoma City Thunder. Shai mainly was able to pass Giannis because of his great defense, getting the steals. So because he's able to get these steals now, he's moving up in these rankings. I don't think it'll be enough to catch Embiid or Jokic. They seem to be running away with this award. As I said in the previous segment, Luka always gets into these MVP talks early, but then he ends up fading out. And as I said before, don't agree with Sabonis being on this list. I'm also very surprised that Kevin Durant has not been included on this list. He is a very strong offensive player. He's on a very strong offensive team, but that team has also been a little injury prone, with Bradley Beal not playing a bunch of games. Devin Booker has also is a little bit lower in the voting. So I guess that makes sense why Kevin Durant isn't higher up in the voting, because Devin Booker also claims a spot just below the top 10. But still, I feel like you should consider Kevin Durant, especially now with the performance that he's having and the performances that he's had. He's definitely making a statement for himself to be in the MVP talks. At this rate, though, again, nothing is probably going to stop Embiid or Jokic. So they might as well run away with this award at this point, similar to how Victor Wembanyama is going to run away with the Rookie of the Year, and that is going to be our fourth segment. We're going to talk about Victor Wembanyama absolutely running away with Rookie of the Year, in my personal opinion. We're going to deep dive further into that after a very short break. And welcome back to the fourth and final segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Nelson, and we are going to talk about the Rookie of the Year and exactly how the Rookie of the Year usually boils down to, who ends up winning the award, why they end up winning the award, and why I personally think obviously, I believe that it's going to be Victor who wins the award, and I'm going to explain why I think he's going to win the award and why usually players like him would win the award. Now, there's a lot of talk this year about who wins the Rookie of the Year, though. Even though it should be, everyone would think it would flat out be Victor Wembanyama. It's very surprising how a lot of people say that the Rookie of the Year isn't a flat-out Victor. He leads all rookies in every single category except for assists. So this is also with a lot of people thinking that he doesn't get the ball enough. So he's leading in points, rebounds, steals, blocks, all of those categories. The only stat that he's not leading in is assists amongst rookies. That is absolutely impressive. Other people who argue that it isn't him, however, go back to the other giant that plays on the Oklahoma City Thunder, Chet. He is 7'2", and he is almost as skinny as Kevin Durant. They're both tall, and they're both defensive anchors, Victor Wembanyama and Chet Holmgren. What separates the both of them in terms of voting and who people pick is efficiency and volume stats. Now, Chet is the much more efficient player between the two of them. There's no doubt about it. And he also gets a lot more wins than Victor does, no doubt about it. Victor Wembanyama plays on the San Antonio Spurs. Right now, they're currently one of the worst teams in the NBA right now. So, and Chet Holmgren plays on the Oklahoma City Thunder. And right now, they're looking to be one of the best teams in the NBA right now. So, it definitely shows a difference as to what they're playing for and why they struggle or why they succeed or why their shooting percentages are the way that they are. If you think about it, Victor Wembanyama being on a team that is rebuilding and on a team that is not necessarily where it needs to be, not necessarily the best, and on a team that doesn't necessarily give him the ball when most people feel like he should, that sounds like a recipe for disaster. So it makes sense how his efficiency numbers aren't going to be as high as Chet Holmgren, who is on a system built with draft picks similar to him, with skill sets as good as him, being able to move the ball and move and operate an offense as good as him. Like, all of that is just playing into the role that he has to do on his team. Now, obviously, I'm not saying that the team is the reason why he's efficient. Obviously, he has to hit the shots. But Chet might be the much more efficient player, but Victor has the better total stats and the total numbers. So the efficiency leans towards Chet, but the total stats lean towards Victor. With this in mind, however, Victor also gets a lot more talk than any rookie this year. It's most likely that it's going to be he's most likely the one that's going to be winning this award simply because of how many people are talking about him. Like, he's 7'4", and he can easily dunk the ball without even trying. Why wouldn't you talk about him? It's a similar story to LeBron and Carmelo Anthony. Carmelo Anthony was the best player on a mediocre team that made it to the playoffs in the Denver Nuggets. He had better stats, a little bit better efficiency. Wasn't as popular as LeBron, however. And LeBron had better counting stats, much more hype around him. And because of that, he ended up with the Rookie of the Year award in the end. A lot of people believe that Carmelo Anthony deserved that award over LeBron James. It's like me so far. He is without a doubt the Rookie of the Year in the games that I've seen him play in. So I don't believe that Chet deserves this Rookie of the Year over Victor Wembanyama. Victor might not shoot the ball that well, but it's also not like he gets the best looks that he can. So, as mentioned previously, his teammates don't necessarily give him the ball. That's because if you watch some of his games, he'll have wide open cuts to the basket, and if you throw the ball high enough, you can get it to a spot where only he can catch the ball. And once he catches that ball, it's game over. He's scoring that no matter what. But even with that in mind, some of these players still don't give him the ball, which is absolutely insane to me, because how could you miss someone that is that tall and built like that? So even with that, however, I still think he has this award on lockdown. I don't think Chet is playing bad either, but he has a great team, great picks. So it's not like he's the one that's leading the team. Shai is, as I mentioned before, he's third in MVP voting. So if Shai's third in MVP voting on the team that Chet is, don't you think that Shai has something to do with it? Victor, like I mentioned before, how Victor's on a really bad team. He doesn't necessarily have the picks or the talent to support him as well as Chet Holmgren does. Now, maybe towards the trade deadline, that'll change depending on who they get. DeJounte Murray. Maybe, who knows. But don't necessarily think that winning should be taken into account when you're talking about Rookie of the Year. It's not the same as MVP. Because when you're an MVP, You are like essentially required to get wins because that's how a player is valued. Like, you bring value to a franchise by bringing the franchise its wins. So if you're not getting wins, you're not giving them value. Even though Joel Embiid had 70 on him, Victor Wembanyama still had 33. Now, that's still 70 points on his head, but 33 isn't that bad. Leading the rookies in every stat except for assist also isn't that bad, and that's impressive no matter what anyone says. So I believe this Rookie of the Year is a lock for Victor Wembanyama, the same way how this MVP, as of right now, is a lock for Joel Embiid. Now, the only reason why I say for now is because with Joel Embiid, I think, and that MVP, I believe it could be either Jokic or Embiid that ends up pulling away with that award. Both of them are playing great, so I believe either of them could win that award. But for Rookie of the Year, as I mentioned before, I don't necessarily think wins are going to play much into account when you look at total stats. And as of right now, Victor Wembanyama is leading in that department. So that is the end of our fourth segment, and thus the end of our live stream and the end of our podcast. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Be sure to tune in once again at 12:30 tomorrow, where once again talk about update us on some of these games that happen, update us on the news that's going to go down. And be sure, once again, to remember to tip and to donate to the link below in the ticker. As you can see, that is streamelements.com/gsmcsportsnetwork./tip. I am your host, Nelson, and as always, take care.